Hey there and welcome back. So you wanted to really get into the nitty-gritty of the labor market.
It's a big one.
It is. And I'm so glad we have you here with us today to help break it all down.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we've done our homework, right? We've got research papers, economic analyses, even some real-world examples
Yeah.
to make things a bit more tangible.
You know, it's interesting because the labor market often feels like this sort of abstract concept, but it's really the system that connects all of us, what we do every day.
To the products and services.
The products and services that we use, exactly.
It's the backbone of the economy, really.
It is.
And that's why we wanted to do this deep dive.
Absolutely.
And we're trying to figure out, how is it going to be different in the future?
It's the million-dollar question, right?
It is. So to answer that, we got to start with the basics, right? We're talking about factors of production, land, labor, capital, and that entrepreneurial spirit that brings it all together.
It's the magic ingredient, that entrepreneurial spirit.
It is. But then, we were prepping for this, and we came across this idea of rent of ability, and it really got us thinking.
It's a fascinating concept, right? The idea that some people earn more simply because society values their skills more.
Like their skills are in higher demand or...
Exactly. Think about professional athletes, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Their salaries are astronomical compared to, say, teachers, even though both professions are vital to society.
Very different pay scales.
And it highlights how the labor market isn't just about cold, hard numbers.
It's about value judgments, too.
Absolutely. It's influenced by our values and perceptions as a society.
Okay, so it's not just about how much you produce, it's about how much society values what you produce.
That's a great way to put it.
So much to unpack there. Now let's break down this labor market piece by piece, starting with supply and demand.
The foundational principles, right?
Yeah, because that's at the heart of any market.
Exactly.
So, we hear about product markets all the time.
Right, where we buy things.
Yeah.
Those new gadgets, those clothes we've been eyeing.
Exactly, but the labor market, that's different. Right.
It is. It's what economists call a factor market.
Okay, a factor market.
This is where businesses are buying the resources
To make the things.
that they need to make things.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's like a whole other layer.
And here's the key difference.
Okay.
Labor demand, the demand for workers, is what we call derived demand.
Derived demand.
Businesses don't want workers just for the sake of having workers.
Well,
right?
they want them to do something.
They want them for the value that they create, the goods and services they help produce.
So, a bakery doesn't hire people just to have them hang out in the kitchen.
Exactly.
They need bakers to actually make the pastries.
To create those delicious treats that we all love.
Okay, that makes total sense. So to understand this whole demand thing, we need to talk about these concepts. Marginal physical productivity, or MPP, and marginal revenue productivity, or MRP.
Ah, the joys of economics jargon.
I know, right? But they're actually pretty straightforward.
They are once you break them down.
Yeah, so let's try.
Think of it this way. If that bakery hires one more baker, how many extra pastries can they make? That's MPP. How much more physical output can they produce?
Okay, the extra pastries, got it.
And then MRP, marginal revenue productivity, asks, okay, how much extra money does the bakery make from selling those extra pastries?
So it's about the money they make from the extra baker.
Exactly. It's all about the extra output and the extra revenue each additional worker brings to the table.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
It's like a puzzle, right?
But hold on. Doesn't that famous law of diminishing returns come into play at some point?
Yes. The law that governs every baker, every factory, every business, really.
So, at some point, having too many bakers might actually slow things down, right?
Exactly. Imagine that bakery kitchen, right? At first, each new baker adds efficiency. They specialize.
One's kneading, one's on the oven.
One is kneading dough, another is shaping croissants. Things are moving smoothly.
But at some point,
But then you get to a point where you've got bakers crammed in there.
bumping elbows.
Bumping elbows, fighting over oven mitts.
It's getting chaotic.
Chaos in the bakery. And suddenly, adding more workers actually decreases efficiency.
Makes sense. Too many cooks in the kitchen, or too many bakers in this case.
Exactly. Too many bakers spoil the broth, so to speak.
Love it. Okay, so we've got the demand side down, but what about the supply of labor? Why are some folks more willing to work than others?
That's where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah, because it's not always about just needing a job.
Absolutely. The supply of labor is influenced by a whole bunch of factors like population size.
More people, more workers.
Obviously, more people means more potential workers, right?
Right.
But it's also about the participation rate, which is how many people are actually willing and able to work.
So people who want to work and can work.
Exactly. And that can depend on things like government policies, cultural attitudes towards work, even access to things like childcare or transportation.
So many factors at play.
It's a complex web, for sure.
And of course, wages have got to play a big role,
Yeah.
right? Like how much you're getting paid.
Oh, absolutely. Wages are a huge incentive.
But wait, isn't there this weird thing called a backward bending supply curve? Does that mean higher wages could actually make people work less?
It sounds counterintuitive, I know.
It does.
But think about it. If you're already making a comfortable living and you get a slight pay raise, it might not be worth it if it means working crazy long hours.
And missing out on life.
Sacrificing your free time, yeah.
Right. Like remember that time you almost took that high-paying job?
Oh, yeah.
But it would have meant working weekends and missing your friend's birthday party.
Tough choices.
That was you wrestling with the supply curve.
Exactly. We've all been there.
Okay, so sometimes more money isn't always the answer. That means sacrificing other things that are important to you.
Work-life balance is key.
Totally. All right, so we've covered the basics of supply and demand, but now I want to get into the nitty-gritty of why different jobs get paid so differently.
Ugh, the age-old question.
Right. Like, why does a doctor make way more than, say, a barista? Is it just about the skills and training involved?
Skills and training definitely play a big role, yes.
Like certain jobs require more specialized knowledge.
Absolutely. Highly specialized skills, like those needed for a surgeon or a software developer.
It takes a lot of time to learn those things.
It takes time, it takes money to acquire, and that scarcity drives up their value.
Okay, so like supply and demand again.
Exactly. But it's not the whole story. There's more to it.
What else is there?
Well, think about the level of risk involved in different jobs.
Oh, right. Some jobs are way more dangerous.
A bomb disposal expert versus someone with a cushy desk job, for instance.
Yeah. Big difference in risk there.
Big difference in pay, too, usually.
So higher risk, higher reward.
That's often the case, yes.
Seems fair enough.
And then there's that societal value piece we talked about earlier.
Right. Rendivability.
Remember, some jobs pay well simply because society deems them important, even if they're not particularly risky or demanding in terms of skills.
So it's like a collective agreement that certain professions are super valuable.
Exactly.
Like doctors, teachers, or engineers.
We as a society decide that these roles are crucial for our well-being, and we compensate them accordingly.
Makes sense.
It's like we're saying, we really need you to do this job, so we're willing to pay you more to make sure it gets done.
Okay, so it's this mix of skills, risk, and societal value, like a complex equation with all these different variables.
It's a multifaceted equation, for sure.
Fascinating. But it also makes me wonder, like, sometimes these factors can lead to some pretty big wage disparities, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Raises questions about fairness and economic inequality.
Big questions that deserve their own deep dive, for sure.
Agreed. But, okay, so we've tackled why some jobs pay more than others, but what about the jobs that pay very little? Couldn't we just raise the minimum wage and solve that problem?
The minimum wage to pay.
Always a hot topic.
It's one of those issues where there are valid arguments on both sides.
Yeah, it sounds straightforward, but I'm sensing it's not.
Proponents argue that raising the minimum wage lifts the standard of living for low-wage workers, right?
Makes sense. Put more money in their pockets.
And it can boost the economy because they have more spending power.
Right. They can afford more things.
But then you have opponents who worry about the unintended consequences.
Ah, there it is. Unintended consequences.
They argue that a higher minimum wage could actually lead to job losses, especially for small businesses or businesses with tight margins.
Because their labor costs go up.
Exactly. They might not be able to afford to keep as many employees.
And then what happens to those workers?
And they might also raise prices to compensate, right? Passing the cost on to consumers.
And then we all end up paying more for things.
And that can fuel inflation, which hurts everyone in the long run.
So it's a balancing act. You want to help workers, but you don't want to trigger a chain reaction of negative effects.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
So are there any clear answers when it comes to economics?
That's the thing about economics, isn't it? It's all about trade-offs and unintended consequences. But the minimum wage debate is especially tricky because the evidence on its impact is mixed.
So it really depends on the situation.
It depends on the industry, the economic context, all sorts of factors.
This is making my head spin.
It's a lot to take in, I know.
But it's so important to understand these things.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about supply and demand. We've talked about wages. But what about people who want jobs but can't find them? What's the deal with unemployment?
Right, let's dive into that.
Because that's a big piece of the puzzle.
Huge. And it's not as simple as it seems.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us.
First, we need to define what we mean by full employment.
Doesn't that just mean everyone has a job?
Not quite. It actually means everyone who wants a job and is actively looking for one can find one.
So there's a distinction there.
There is.
So you could be unemployed, but not actively looking for a job.
Exactly. You may be retired, a stay-at-home parent, or just not interested in working at the moment.
Right, right. Okay, and even then, there's this thing called underemployment,
Yeah.
where people might have jobs.
But they're not using their skills to their full potential.
Like they're overqualified for the job they have.
Imagine a trained architect working as a barista because they can't find a job in their field.
Oh, that's got to be frustrating.
So you can be employed but still feel underutilized.
Right, like you're not really contributing what you're capable of.
Exactly. And that can have economic and psychological impacts.
Makes sense.
Now let's talk about the different types of unemployment.
Okay, because I've heard there are a few.
There are. The first one is frictional unemployment.
Frictional unemployment.
This is the kind of unemployment that happens when people are between jobs.
So, like, they just quit one job and are looking for another.
Or they just graduated and are entering the workforce for the first time.
Right. It's like a natural part of the process.
Exactly. It takes time to find the right job, to go through interviews, to make a transition.
Okay, so that makes sense. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's a natural part of a dynamic labor market.
So what are the other types?
Well, there's structural unemployment.
Structural unemployment.
This is when there's a mismatch between the skills workers have and the skills employers need.
Oh, okay. So, like, the economy is shifting.
Exactly. Imagine all the manufacturing jobs disappear and are replaced by jobs that require coding skills.
Right. That makes sense.
Workers without those coding skills would face structural unemployment.
So it's like the skills they have are no longer in demand.
And that's where retraining and upskilling become crucial.
Right, so they can learn those new skills that are needed.
Absolutely.
I bet there's one more type, right? Seasonal unemployment.
You got it. That one's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, like those tourism jobs that dry up during the off-season.
Or agricultural work that depends on specific harvest time.
Right, it just comes and goes with the seasons.
And the unemployment is usually temporary.
Okay, so we've got those three types down, but how do we actually measure all of this unemployment?
That's a great question, and it highlights how even simple statistics can be more nuanced than they seem.
Because I feel like I hear different numbers sometimes.
You do, and that's because there are different ways to measure it.
Oh, okay, so like different methods.
Exactly. In Ireland, we use two main methods.
Get me with them.
We have the live register,
Live register.
which counts everyone receiving unemployment benefits.
Okay, so that's a pretty direct measure.
It is, but it can be a bit inflated because it includes people who might be working part-time while still receiving some benefits.
Ah, so it doesn't necessarily reflect the full picture.
Exactly. And then we have the Quarterly National Household Survey, or QHNS,
QHNS, got it.
which is a survey that goes out to a sample of households.
So they ask people about their employment status,
Exactly. It's considered more accurate than the live register.
but people could lie on the survey.
There's always that possibility, but it's generally considered more reliable.
Okay, so it's like we're using two different tools to measure the same thing.
And by looking at both, we get a more complete picture of what's really going on.
It's like a 3D view of unemployment.
Exactly. It helps us understand the nuances.
Okay, this is all making a lot more sense now. So we've covered a lot, from the basic laws of supply and demand to the different types of unemployment.
We've laid a good foundation.
We have. But in all this talk about jobs and workers, I feel like we haven't given enough love to the risk takers, the entrepreneurs.
Ah, the entrepreneurs, the lifeblood of the economy.
Exactly. So why are they so important in all of this?
Well, they're the ones who see a need in the market, and they take a risk to fill it.
They're the innovator.
The innovators, the job creators, the ones who push the boundaries.
And they bring together land, labor, and capital to create those goods and services we were talking about earlier.
They're the conductors of the economic orchestra.
Okay, I'm already picturing those inspiring montages of entrepreneurs working late into the night, coding, designing, coming up with the next big thing.
It's exciting, right?
It is.
It is.
But it's not all sunshine and roses, is it? There's risk involved, and profit isn't guaranteed.
Oh, absolutely. Being an entrepreneur is not for the faint of heart.
So what kind of risks are we talking about here?
You've got your everyday risks, the insurable ones.
Like a fire or theft, right?
Exactly. Those are manageable. You can get insurance for that.
But then there were the uninsurable risks, the ones that keep entrepreneurs up at night.
Ah, yes. The nail biters. Like a sudden shift in consumer tastes.
Oh yeah, like what if nobody wants your product anymore?
Or a new competitor bursts onto the scene and disrupts your whole industry.
Right, or some global pandemic that nobody saw coming.
That's the kind of stuff that entrepreneurs have to navigate.
So it takes a certain type of person, right?
Yeah.
Someone who's innovative, resilient, adaptable, and maybe even a little bit lucky.
Definitely a healthy dose of luck involved. But when entrepreneurs succeed, the impact ripples through the entire economy.
All right, let's talk about those ripple effects. How do successful entrepreneurs shape the labor market and the economy as a whole?
Well, first and foremost, they create jobs.
That's the big one.
And not just any jobs. Often, they're creating jobs that are more innovative, more fulfilling, more aligned with the changing needs of the economy.
So it's not just about quantity, it's about quality too.
Exactly. They're driving progress and creating opportunities.
And I'm guessing all those successful businesses generate a lot of tax revenue, which helps fund all sorts of important things, right?
Absolutely. Things like education, healthcare infrastructure, all of that is fueled by tax revenue. And successful entrepreneurs are contributing a big chunk of that.
So it's this virtuous cycle. They create successful businesses, which leads to more jobs and more tax revenue, which strengthens the economy.
And creates even more opportunities for entrepreneurship.
It's like this amazing ecosystem where everyone benefits.
That's the beauty of it.
Wow, I'm feeling really inspired right now. This deep dive is really giving me a whole new appreciation for the role of entrepreneurs in the labor market.
They're the unsung heroes in many ways.
They are. But before we get too carried away with dreams of starting our own businesses, I think we still have a lot more to unpack about the labor market.
You're right. We've only just scratched the surface.
So much more to explore.
Next time, we'll dig deeper into how the labor market is measured, explore the impact of government policies, and really look at how technology is shaping the future of work.
Okay, I'm already hooked. Can't wait to continue this conversation.
Me too. It's going to be fascinating.
See you next time.
See you then. So ready to keep digging into this labor market stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Especially that whole measuring unemployment thing. We
Yeah.
touched on it earlier, but now I'm ready for like the full breakdown.
Okay, let's get into it.
Hit me with it.
Remember those two main methods we use in Ireland?
The live register and
The
the
Quarterly National Household Survey.
QHNS.
Oh.
You mentioned the live register can be a bit iffy, right? Like not always super accurate.
Yeah, it can be a bit inflated sometimes
Inflated, okay.
because it counts anyone who's receiving unemployment benefits, even if they're working part-time and getting a little bit of assistance on the side.
Oh, so it makes the numbers look a bit higher than they actually are.
Exactly. It can skew the figures upward a bit.
Gotcha. So not a perfect system.
Not perfect, no.
What about the QHNS then? That's the one that's based on surveys, right?
Right, so it relies on people accurately reporting their employment status.
Which, people aren't always honest.
Well, we hope they are. But yeah, there's always a margin of error with surveys.
Human error, yeah.
Some people might misunderstand the questions or...
Or maybe they just forget some details.
Exactly. But overall, it's generally considered more reliable than the live register.
Okay, so we've got two imperfect tools, but together they paint a more complete picture.
Exactly, like using two different rulers to double-check a measurement.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift gears a bit now and talk about something that can really shake things up. Government intervention.
Ah, yes, the government's rule.
It's like a double-edged sword, right?
It can be. On one hand, you've got those smart policies that can really help things run smoother.
By fixing some of the problems that naturally crop up in the market.
Right. Promote fairness, protect workers from exploitation.
Okay, like give me some examples of those good policies.
Think about things like workplace safety regulations or laws against discrimination.
Oh yeah, those are crucial.
These are meant to create a level playing field for everyone, make sure workers have basic rights and protections.
Okay, so that's the good side of government intervention. But what about the bad side? Because I know you mentioned it can backfire.
Oh yeah, too much intervention or policies that aren't well thought out.
They can mess things up.
Big time. They can stifle innovation, discourage companies from investing, and even lead to job losses.
Or make things more expensive for consumers.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act.
So policymakers really have to walk a tightrope between protecting workers and letting the market do its thing.
Finding that sweet spot is key.
Absolutely. Speaking of things that disrupt the market, what about technology? That feels like a game changer these days.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, think about how automation and AI are already transforming the way we work.
It's like robots are taking over.
Well, not quite taking over.
Not yet.
But they are changing the landscape, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's not just physical labor anymore.
Right.
It's like those white-collar jobs, the thinking jobs, those are being impacted too.
Algorithms and AI systems are changing how we do everything these days, from driving cars to diagnosing diseases. It's mind-blowing.
It is. It's like we're in the middle of another industrial revolution.
Some say we are.
But it makes me wonder about the future of work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Will there even be jobs for us humans in this world of robots?
That's a question a lot of people are asking.
A valid question.
Right. While it's true that some jobs will inevitably become automated, history shows us that technological advancements also create new opportunities.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. It's more about adaptation.
So we need to be ready to adapt to these changes.
Exactly. The key is to prepare the workforce for the jobs of the future.
Okay, so that brings us back to that big question from the beginning. How is the labor market of the future going to look different from today?
Crystal ball. Anyone.
Yeah, I wish.
Predicting the future is impossible, but based on what we see happening now, it's pretty clear that technology is going to continue disrupting traditional industries.
And creating new ones.
And creating new ones. We're likely to see a huge surge in demand for specialized skills, things like data analysis, AI development, cybersecurity.
So basically, tech skills are the future.
Well, technical skills are important, yes, but don't underestimate those soft skills.
People skills.
Exactly. Things like critical thinking, creativity, the ability to communicate effectively, being a good team player, those are always going to be valuable.
So robots can't do everything.
Not yet. Those human skills, like empathy and problem solving, those are much harder to automate.
So we need to be more human, basically.
Exactly. In a rapidly changing world, the ability to learn, adapt, and solve problems is going to be more important than ever, no matter what field you're in.
Okay, this is all fascinating stuff, but it also feels a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
How do we prepare for a future that feels so uncertain?
That's the million-dollar question, and we'll dive deeper into that in the next part of our conversation.
Okay, good, because I need some practical tips.
We'll talk about some specific steps you can take to stay ahead of the curve.
Awesome. But before we wrap up this part, I'm curious, what's one thing you think everyone should know about the labor market that maybe they don't?
That's a good one. If I had to pick just one thing, it would be this. The labor market isn't this abstract force, it's a reflection of our choices.
Okay, unpack that for me.
It's shaped by the decisions we make every day, the skills we develop, the jobs we choose, the policies we support.
So we have more control over it than we think.
Absolutely. We're not just passive players here, we're active participants.
Okay, that's empowering. I like that.
By understanding how the system works, we can start making more informed decisions, both for ourselves and for the future of work as a whole.
Okay, that's a good pep talk.
We all have a role to play.
All right, well, I'm feeling more informed and maybe a little less terrified about the future.
That's what we like to hear.
Bring on part 3. I'm ready for more. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the labor market.
The grand finale.
It is. We've covered so much ground, supply and demand, those entrepreneurial heroes.
We're the risk takers.
Exactly. But now I really want to shift the focus to, what does all this mean for you, the listener? How can you navigate this crazy world of work?
Right, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
It is, and I think one of the biggest misconceptions, at least for me, was always that the labor market is like this fixed thing,
Static and unchanging.
Yeah, it's always been this way and it's always going to be this way.
Like a mountain range that's been there forever.
Yes. But I'm sensing it's not like that at all.
Not at all. The labor market's more like a river, constantly flowing, adapting to its surroundings,
Okay, I love that analogy. So if it's always changing, how do we even begin to prepare for the future? It feels kind of daunting.
It can be, but the good news is you've already taken the first step just by being here with us today.
Oh, good. I'm glad I checked that off the list.
Because knowledge is power, right?
Right.
Understanding how the labor market works, what drives it, that's crucial for making smart choices about your career.
So step 1, listen to this deep dive.
Check.
Okay, what's next?
Next, it's all about self-assessment, taking stock of your skills, interests, and values, What are you good at?
Okay, what am I good at?
What do you actually enjoy doing?
I like talking to people.
There you go. And what kind of impact do you want to make in the world?
I want to make a positive impact.
Exactly. It's like taking inventory of your personal toolkit before starting a big project.
Love that. So once I've figured out my strengths and what I want, what then?
Then you can start exploring different career paths and see if there are any gaps in your skill set, maybe some areas where you need to upscale or reskill.
Okay, so like, give me a concrete example.
Say you're a graphic designer who's always been fascinated by tech.
Okay, I know a few people like that.
Should you be learning how to code? That's the question you have to ask yourself.
It seems like a good idea these days.
Right, because the demand for designers who can also code or who have a good understanding of user experience, that's only going to increase.
So I can combine my design skills with some coding know-how and really open up some doors.
Exactly. Position yourself for those emerging opportunities.
Okay, that's good advice. What if I'm not really a tech person, but I'm really good with people and I love solving problems?
Then you might think about fields like healthcare, education, social work.
Okay.
These are sectors that will always need people.
No matter what happens with technology.
Exactly. There will always be a need for skilled and compassionate individuals in those roles.
Right, so it's not just about blindly chasing the tech trends.
It's about finding the right fit for you, the intersection of your skills, your interests, and the needs of the market.
That makes sense. Yeah. But with all this talk about robots and AI, I still can't help but feel a little nervous about the future.
Yeah, I get it.
Are there any jobs that are truly robot-proof?
That's the big question, isn't it? While no job is completely immune to change, some skills are much harder to automate.
Okay, like what?
Things like creativity, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, the ability to solve complex problems that require like nuanced judgment.
Those are all like human skills, right?
Exactly. Robots are great at processing data and performing repetitive tasks with incredible speed.
They're very efficient.
But they lack that human touch, you know?
The empathy, the intuition.
Exactly. The things that make us human, those are our superpowers in the age of automation.
Okay, so it's not about competing with robots. It's about working with them, leveraging our human strengths.
Exactly. It's a partnership, not a battle.
I like that. We're on the same team.
Exactly. And remember, the labor market is constantly evolving, creating new challenges, and those challenges require human ingenuity to solve.
So we need to embrace that growth mindset, be willing to learn and adapt, and really focus on developing those uniquely human skills.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so that's good advice for, like, everyone. But what about people who are just starting out in their careers? You know, fresh out of school or just entering the workforce for the first time?
It's a whole different ball game these days.
It is, and the pressure to choose the right path feels immense.
Right. Because who knows what the job market's going to look like in 5-10 years.
Exactly. So what advice do you have for young people facing this uncertainty?
My advice is this. Don't be afraid to experiment.
So it's okay to not have it all figured out right away.
Absolutely. Try different things. Explore your interests, you know? You don't have to commit to one specific path right away.
It's like test the waters a bit.
Exactly. The more experiences you have, the more skills you develop, the more adaptable you become, the better prepared you'll be for whatever the future throws at you.
So embrace the zigzag.
Exactly. Zigzag your way to success.
I love it. Okay, this has been an incredible conversation. We've really gone deep, haven't we?
We have, from those fundamental economic principles to the mind-boggling world of technology and AI.
And through it all, the message is clear. It's all about those human skills, those things that make us uniquely valuable.
The things that robots can't replicate, at least not yet.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, remember, you are not just a cog in the machine.
You have the power to shape your own destiny.
Embrace lifelong learning, cultivate those human strengths, and be an active participant in this ever-evolving world of work.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to dream big.
Because the future is full of possibilities. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the labor market. We hope you learned a thing or two.
And that you're feeling a little more prepared, a little more empowered to navigate the future of work.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.